A smartphone in your pocket might feel outdated in 3 years. A trendy startup can disappear in 5. An entire industry can be reshaped in a decade. This is the rhythm we've come to accept as normal. Fast, disposable, replaceable. And yet, somewhere in the quiet workshops of Japan, something completely different is happening. There are companies with only a handful of employees, sometimes working in buildings older than most countries' constitutions, making knives, kettles, brushes, paper, wooden tools, and precision parts that are designed to outlive the people who buy them. Not last a year, not last a decade, last 100 years. And here's the strange part. Many of these companies aren't famous. They aren't massive. They don't have viral marketing campaigns or billion-dollar valuations. They're small, sometimes painfully small. So how is it possible that the smallest companies in Japan are building products more durable than the lifespan of most modern corporations? The answer isn't just Japanese quality. It isn't just tradition or aesthetics. It's something deeper, an entirely different way of thinking about products, customers, time, and the meaning of doing good work. And once you understand it, it changes how you look at almost everything you own. To really understand why these Japanese workshops are unusual, you have to look at the world they're standing against. Most products today are designed inside a very specific logic. They're built to be upgraded. They're built to be improved next quarter, next year, next cycle. Companies optimize for growth, for market share, for hitting numbers that look good on a slide. Innovation in this context usually means adding features, releasing new models, redesigning packaging, or finding new reasons for customers to come back and buy again. And we, as consumers, have learned to live inside that loop. We don't repair anymore. We replace. A broken zipper means a new jacket. A slow phone means a new phone. A worn-out blender means a quick search and a fresh box at the door tomorrow morning. None of this is necessarily evil. It's just the logic of a system built around speed and turnover. But now, step into a small workshop in a place like Sakai, or Kumano, or a quiet street in Kyoto, and the question on the table is completely different. The owner isn't asking, how do we sell more units this year? They're asking something much stranger and much harder. How do we make sure this thing still works beautifully in 30, 50, maybe 100 years? That single shift in question changes everything that follows. The companies we're talking about don't look like much from the outside. Sometimes it's a wooden building tucked into a side street. Sometimes it's a small factory next to a river. Sometimes it's a family home with a workshop attached. They might employ 5 people, or 20, or 50. Many have existed for generations, passed down through families, sometimes carrying names that stretch back hundreds of years. And almost all of them share a strange characteristic. They focus on something incredibly narrow. There are knife makers in Sakai who have done essentially the same work for centuries. There are brush makers in Kumano who can spend an entire career mastering a single kind of bristle. There are woodworkers in Kyoto who specialize in joints so precise they don't need glue. There are small metal shops in Osaka producing components that show up inside the world's most demanding machines. There are families making washi paper, lacquerware, ceramics, textile dyes, or precision industrial parts that no one outside the industry has ever heard of. None of them are trying to become the biggest company in the world. None of them are trying to dominate a category. What they're trying to do is much smaller and much harder. Become the most trustworthy maker of one specific thing on the planet. And that single ambition, repeated patiently across decades, is what produces the kind of objects we're about to talk about. The first principle behind a 100-year product is something most modern businesses would consider strategically wrong. Doing only one thing and doing it for an absurdly long time. These small Japanese companies don't try to serve everyone. They don't expand their product lines every season. They don't pivot when something new becomes trendy. They pick one thing. One kind of knife, one type of brush, one variety of paper, one specific component, one technique for finishing a surface, and they stay there for decades, sometimes for centuries. And here's what's interesting. When you do something that long, you accumulate a kind of knowledge that competitors can't simply copy. You start to understand how a material behaves, not just when it's new, but how it ages over 20 years. You start to recognize the tiny imperfections that look harmless today, but will become real problems decades later. You start to learn what customers actually need, as opposed to what they think they want at the moment of purchase. That kind of insight isn't written down anywhere. It lives inside the workshop. And it's the reason a knife from a fifth-generation blacksmith feels different in your hand than a knife from a factory that started making them last year. 100-year durability doesn't begin in the final stage of production. It begins with a company patient enough to understand a product more deeply than almost anyone else alive. The second principle shows up the moment you walk into one of these workshops and watch how they treat raw material. In most modern companies, materials are a variable to be optimized. You source cheaper steel. You find a slightly thinner wood. You substitute a similar-looking polymer. The goal is to protect margins. But in a small Japanese workshop, the relationship to material is almost the opposite. Material isn't a cost to minimize. It's the foundation of everything they've spent generations building. They don't just ask whether a piece of wood is strong today. They ask how it will behave in 50 years. They don't just ask whether steel is sharp. They ask how it will respond to thousands of sharpenings. They choose paper, clay, fiber, lacquer, and metal, based on how each material ages, breathes, settles, and earns dignity over time. Many of them maintain decades-long relationships with their suppliers, sometimes families they've worked with for generations, and they understand something that's easy to forget in a spreadsheet-driven world. Saving a small amount on materials can quietly destroy a reputation built over 100 years. A product can be sold once, but the maker's name is being tested every single day for as long as that product exists in someone's home. Once you see material this way, you stop thinking like a manufacturer and start thinking like someone protecting a promise. But here's where the story takes a turn most people don't expect. A product that lasts 100 years isn't a product that never breaks. That's almost impossible. A 100-year product is something different. It's something that, when it breaks, can come back to life. This is one of the deepest principles inside these workshops, and it changes the entire meaning of durability. They don't design objects to be invincible. They design objects to be cared for. The handle of a knife can be replaced. The blade can be reground. A wooden piece can be sanded, refinished, and joined again. A teapot can be reglazed. A piece of metal can be polished back to life. Even the joinery in traditional carpentry is often built so that components can be swapped without destroying the whole piece. And the relationship with the customer doesn't end at the sale. Many of these workshops will gladly take back a product after 30 years to repair it, sharpen it, restore it, or even hand it back to the next generation in a family. There's a quiet philosophy underneath all this, connected to ideas like mottainai, the sense that throwing things away wastes their dignity, or kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery so the cracks become part of the beauty. But you don't have to know the cultural vocabulary to feel the point. Durability isn't only inside the product, it's inside the entire system that surrounds the product after it leaves the workshop. Now, if all of this is true, if these companies really do build the most reliable products in the world, you'd expect them to be huge. You'd expect global expansion, mass production, factories on every continent. But that's not what happens. Most of these companies stay small, deliberately small, stubbornly small. Why? Why don't they raise money, scale up, hire thousands of workers, and flood the world with what they make? Why don't they franchise their craft and become the next global premium brand? The answer is uncomfortable for anyone trained in modern business thinking. They don't scale, because scaling too fast would destroy the very thing that makes their products worth 100 years in the first place. Skill can't be cloned the way software can. A culture of quality can't be copy-pasted into a new factory just because you wrote down the procedure. A product that needs to last a century requires a pace of learning that simply doesn't match the pace of market growth. And once you understand that tension, you realize the next principle isn't really about manufacturing at all. It's about restraint. These workshops have made a choice most modern companies are afraid to make. They've decided that growth, on its own, isn't a good enough reason to do anything. Fast growth means hiring fast. Hiring fast means training fast. Training fast means producing faster. And when your product depends on subtle judgment, the feel of a blade, the angle of a brush, the weight of a tool, the grain of a piece of wood, fast simply doesn't work. A new craftsman doesn't just learn techniques. They learn how to feel when something is wrong before they can even explain why. They learn invisible standards that aren't written in any manual. That kind of knowledge takes years, sometimes a decade, to fully transfer. When a workshop stays small, the master can still walk over and inspect the piece. The owner can still notice when the rhythm of work is off. The whole team can still share one standard of what good enough actually means. And every defective product isn't just a defective product. It's a small crack in a reputation that took generations to build. To these companies, growth isn't bad. They're not against success, but growth is only worth pursuing if quality can keep up. And quality, in their world, doesn't accelerate just because demand does. Which brings us to the human core of all this. The reason these products live so long isn't only because of materials, design, or restraint. It's because the knowledge behind them is passed down. Carefully, slowly, almost ceremonially, from one generation to the next. And what's transferred isn't just technique. An apprentice in one of these workshops doesn't only learn how to hold a tool. They learn how to look at material. They learn how to spot a flaw most people would never see. They learn how to treat a customer's order as personal responsibility. They learn how to refuse to compromise on details that don't seem to matter. They learn that the name on the product is also the name of every person who made it. So much of this knowledge can't fit inside a manual. It lives in repetition, observation, mistakes, and corrections that happen quietly, day after day. The apprentice fails, gets corrected, tries again, and slowly grows into the kind of judgment that no document could ever teach. And this is what allows a small workshop to keep producing the same level of quality across decades, even centuries. What's being passed down isn't just how to make something. It's how to decide when something is good enough to carry your name. If you put all of this together, deep specialization, honest materials, design that allows repair, growth that protects quality, knowledge passed across generations, you start to see that we're no longer just talking about manufacturing. We're talking about ethics. Because what's really keeping these objects alive for 100 years isn't better steel, or better wood, or better hands. It's a different kind of relationship between the maker and the user. Most modern products are designed with the next purchase in mind. The packaging assumes you'll be back. The pricing assumes the product will fail. The marketing is built around the next upgrade, the next version, the next reason to spend again. But these small Japanese companies are doing something almost rebellious. They're building products designed to keep serving the customer as long as possible, and in doing so, removing the need for that customer to come back. They put long-term reputation above short-term profit. They're not just asking, will the customer buy this? They're asking something much harder. Years from now, will the customer still feel grateful that they did? And that question changes the entire moral architecture of the work. A 100-year product doesn't begin with the ambition to make something immortal. It begins with a much humbler decision. Today, I will not make something that disappoints the person who hasn't even bought it yet. You don't have to be a Japanese craftsman to take something away from this. The principles inside these tiny workshops apply to founders, designers, marketers, creators, builders, and honestly, to anyone who makes anything for someone else to use. Not every company needs to last 100 years, but every company can think a little further ahead than next quarter. Not every product needs to be used for a lifetime, but every product can respect the time and trust of the person buying it. Quality, in the way these workshops define it, isn't a feature on a spec sheet. It's the feeling someone has about your work many years after they've stopped thinking about you. A real brand isn't built on what you promise. It's built on whether your product keeps that promise long after the receipt has faded. So maybe the question isn't, how do we make every product last 100 years? Maybe the better question is something quieter and more uncomfortable. Are we designing for the moment of purchase, or for the entire life the product will live in someone's hands? In a world obsessed with speed, scale, and constant replacement, these small Japanese companies have chosen a completely different rhythm. They don't win by being the biggest. They don't win by being the loudest. They win by being patient. By making one thing well enough, for long enough, the time itself becomes their advantage. They aren't building empires. They're building objects that quietly outlast the trends, the markets, and even the lives of the people who first made them. The products that last 100 years aren't created only by skilled hands. They're created by companies that understand something most of the modern world has forgotten. Real reputation isn't measured on the day of the sale. It's measured decades later when the product is still doing exactly what it was made to do. And the name behind it still means exactly what it was meant to mean. If you've ever owned something that made you feel like the person who made it really cared, I'd love to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about how different cultures, makers, and companies create things designed to outlast trends, consider subscribing. There are a lot more of these quiet but powerful stories worth telling. And I'd love for you to be there for the next one.